I'm Dr. Deepak Chopra, and today I'm going to address the question of whether science, the scientific method as we know it, whether that can explain the origins of the universe, whether that can give us access to reality or life or the meaning of life or existence or that which we call consciousness or awareness. It's a very important question because over the last several decades I've engaged with scientists, sometimes in contentious debate and sometimes in polite discourse and dialogue on these questions. Many scientists of great repute, like Richard Dawkins, have over the years called me a charlatan, a fraud, a pseudoscientist. Even my friend Michael Shermer, who's actually become a good friend over the years, has labeled me as a fraud or a charlatan or a pseudoscientist. We are beginning to come to a place of reconciliation where we do understand that we come from two different worldviews. But the question remains, can the scientific method or science explain fundamental reality or existence or truth with a capital T or the nature of the universe or the nature of what or who I am as a conscious being? In order to do that, we first have to address what science is. Let's start off by saying that science is a method of human inquiry. I'll repeat that. Science is a method of human inquiry in human consciousness. If you don't like the word consciousness, then you can even use the word mind for now. Science is a mental activity, or at least it begins as a mental activity in human consciousness and as a method of inquiry. So that method of inquiry has three very distinct components that operate in a loop. The loop is theory, experiment, observation, validation or falsifiability. So most scientists first have a theory about how something works. And it could be a biological theory, a mathematical theory, theory in physics, quantum mechanics, whatever. But there is a theory, a set of constructs that come about to create a placeholder, to create a construct, a framework for the next step, which is the designing of an experiment in order to validate or refute the theory. So that's the second part of the scientific method. And then the third part is the validation through observation and verification. Good scientists publish their observations, their theories, and their experiments in what are called peer-reviewed publications. Then other scientists repeat the same experiments, make the same observations, and if in fact they agree that they all have the same observations, then the theory is considered valid. And that's how science progresses. If you look at the history of science, it is this history of theory, experiment, validation, until the previous theory is you might say, made irrelevant by a new theory. And that happens because there are observations made that are anomalous. They don't fit into the previous framework. And so now a new theory is is created by scientists. So one of the tenets of scientific inquiry is falsifiability. Theory is not considered valid if it is not subject to falsifiability. Okay, so having defined the basic ways that human beings do science, the next thing we want to ask today in this discussion or in this exposition is science as a methodology of self-inquiry an experience? Scientific inquiry is an experience. I think everybody would agree. It's a scientific inquiry is an experience different than the experience we call music or poetry or art or literature or dance, any other experience. So science is an experience. And that experience occurs where? It occurs in our consciousness or awareness. Where else could it occur? The scientific inquiry is a methodology in human consciousness. Theories are conceived in human consciousness. Experiments are designed in human consciousness. And observations are made by conscious observers, in this case, conscious human observers. So it's very obvious that science is an activity in consciousness. One of the first things I would like to ask scientists is, what came before? Did consciousness come before, or did the scientific method come before? I think the answer is obvious. You need consciousness to create a method of inquiry in consciousness. So consciousness has to precede the scientific method. So then we ask ourselves, can the scientific method explain what gave birth to the scientific method? Because consciousness gave birth to the scientific method. Now, can this method actually give us insight into the nature of that which gave birth to the scientific method? A very difficult question that many scientists don't ask. Can I explain that which preceded the birth of a method? So when we say reality, we can see right here that reality cannot be a methodology. Reality cannot be a system of thought, even though it's a very elegant system of thought, which uses theory, experimentation, and observation. It's still a system, very different from the system of thought that we call religion, another system of thought, philosophy, another system of thought, theology, another system of thought. These thoughts attempt to explain reality without getting into the source of the thought which resulted in the system of thought. So on Twitter, I engaged with my friend Michael Shermer because, Michael Shermer, his friend Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Brian Cox, Lawrence Krauss, all these luminaries of science pride themselves on rational thought. So I thought I'd ask my friend Michael Shermer, what is the source of thought, since you pride yourself in rational thought? And he responded on Twitter. He said it's an expression of neural networks and their firings that give rise to thought. And, he got a lot of support for that. Neural networks and their firings in a particular manner give rise to the experience we call thought. And one could now continue this dialogue by asking the following question. What is it that knows your experience or has the experience of that which humans call a brain or a neural network? I'll repeat. What is it that knows the experience of that which humans call the firing of neural networks? Think about it. How do we know there is such a thing as a neural network? Who or what is it that knows the experience that we call a neural network? And if you take this line of reasoning a little bit, then you'll realize that it leads to a dead end. Because what we call a neural network is itself a mode of knowing and experience, and at this moment we cannot explain that. We cannot explain who or what is it that has given a label, a definition, a description to a mode of inquiry and a mode of knowing that is human, first of all. The word neural network, neural firings, neural correlate, even the word brain is a label, a description, a construct, an idea to a mode of knowing and experience. It's a human label to an experience that you call a neural correlate of thought. And if you say that thought is created by the firing of these neural networks, which in fact are symbols of modes of knowing and experience in human consciousness, then you're using the symbols to explain the symbols. I hope this is clear, that the brain and the neural networks and their firings are symbols created by human beings to express modes of knowing and experience in human consciousness. They are a species-specific mode of knowing and experience described by humans with words, labels, mathematical and other constructs to explain a mode of knowing or experience without knowing the true nature of experience. And then a whole system created around that, that's called rational thought. Now, is that useful? Of course it is useful. It gave rise to what is called modern civilization, and it gave rise to technology, including the technology that I am using right now to impart this experience to you. And so it's very useful, right, for us to navigate the realms of experience and knowing without actually having to explain how we know these realms of knowing that gives rise to the constructs which create the human experience that ultimately we label as mind, body, and universe. It's a whole different discussion that I'm not going to go into right now. But I think it is apparent that anything we can name or describe is a human construct for a more fundamental experience of knowing, which occurs, for a lack of a better word, in a species-specific consciousness that we call human consciousness. So, is science, which is this whole methodology of labeling experience. You know, everything that you can name, whether it's a gluon, or a proton, or an electron, or a boson, is a mode of knowing and experience and perception or inferences that are drawn from those modes of knowing. Today, what is considered the most precise method of knowing is actually that which we call mathematics. So, Eugene Wigner, a great physicist, mathematician, also is famous for an essay he wrote called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics. Mathematics is an activity in human consciousness, and it very precisely describes what we experience as the universe and the fundamental laws of the universe, which we call laws, but which are actually, again, constructs, human constructs, to explain the regularities of experience without answering the question, who or what is having the experience. And if you say a neural network is having the experience, then you're using a construct in experience labeled as that activity, neural network, to explain the construct. You're explaining the construct to explain the construct. I hope this is very, very clear. So then, can science or the scientific methodology ever answer the question, what is existence, without asking the question, who or what wants to know the answer to the question, what is existence? Who or what wants to know the answer to the question, what is existence? Or if there is a scientific claim that a neural firing and a neural network can create a thought, then who or what is using the construct neural firing to ask the question of what is existence? Without that, we can't. Without that, we cannot actually answer this question. Now, science is a methodology that is very successful, and it does so through the methodology that I explained in creating technology. If you ask scientists and physicists, how do you describe that which we call a physical reality? How do you describe? How do you describe physicality? How do you describe matter? So, if you look up the description of matter, then you'll find that matter is defined as anything that occupies space and has mass. That's the usual definition of matter. Anything, an object, which occupies space and has mass. But science doesn't ask, is that object that is occupying space and exists in time, is it independent of someone observing that object? Does it have an independent existence? And then we get into all kinds of conundrums. How do we experience any object? How do I experience the object that I call my watch? How do I experience the object that I call my hand? How do I experience the object that I call my body? How do I experience the object that I call a chair in front of me? How do I experience any object? And the answer given by scientific realism is the following. The object is already there, and it creates an image in the brain or image somewhere internally that represents that object. But when we go and look inside the brain, there's no image. Okay, so what we call realism, and there are many forms of realism, by the way. There's something called naive realism. Naive realism says that everything appears to be in a certain way, and that's how it is. So the picture of the world is the look of it. If something is round and blue and smooth, shaped like a ball, that's what it is. It's a ball. And there's an image of that somewhere inside, and that image corresponds to that object which I call a red ball. There are many problems with that because, first of all, there's no image in the brain. Secondly, there's no red in the brain. Thirdly, what the brain is experiencing, if we can call it an experience, is electrochemistry, which is the result of action potentials or electrons, you might say electrochemical activity, or just say electrical activity. An action potential is just the movement of ions across cell membranes that are going to the brain from the retina. What's happening in the retina is electrochemistry as well. What is coming to the retina are what we call photons, which have zero rest mass. Therefore, they are not in the realm of matter. They are excitations of an electromagnetic field. So nowhere along this process is there the experience of a red ball. Not in the photons, not in the electrochemistry of the retina, not in the electrical impulse going to the brain, and not in the brain. There's neither red, nor there's a shape, nor there's a form, nor is there a ball. In fact, when we look at the ball itself, there's no red in the ball. Because what's the ball made of? According to our science, it's made up of atoms. Atoms don't have redness or color. And atoms are particles, which are movements of waves of possibility frozen into a moment of perception or an inference of a perception. So there is no red, nor is there that which we call a ball. There's, according to current physicalist science, there's electromagnetic activity, and that electromagnetic activity is also unified with other activities that are called strong and weak interactions, and they're all the same thing, strong and weak interactions. The strong interaction is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. The weak interaction is responsible for radioactive decay, and electromagnetism is everything that we use right now to create our technology, including the one that I'm using right now to communicate this mode of inquiry. So electromagnetism, the strong and weak interactions, they're all the fundamental forces of nature which are unified. They're one force. And then there's a fourth activity in nature, which is called gravity, which is the curvature of space-time. If you heard John Wheeler's description, space-time asks matter to curve, space-time asks matter to move, and matter asks space-time to curve. Try and visualize that. You can't. Okay, because these are abstract constructs, mathematical constructs in human consciousness to explain physical phenomena, but as we get to the root of the physical phenomena, they all disappear into a field of possibilities. So where's the color red? Where does the red ball exist? Where does roundness exist or smoothness exist? Where does the shape, the color, the texture, the smell, the taste of that which I call a hand exist? Where does the experience of the body exist? Where does the experience of a thought exist? Where is the interpretation of all this? Where is all this inquiry happening? And you can't get away from it. It's happening in human awareness. We can't even say it's happening in plant awareness or insect awareness or the awareness in a dolphin or a crocodile or a hippopotamus. The picture of the world is not the look of it. It is one way of looking at it. In the way I'm trying to explain it, it is a human way of looking at it. But there are crocodile ways and snake ways and insect ways and honeybees that do what is called a waggle dance. That's another way of communication. We have no idea of their internal experience or their experience and what their perceptual experience is. We can guess that it's not the same as ours, because snakes sense infrared and honeybees sense ultraviolet, and bats move through the echo of ultrasound, and chameleons' eyeballs swivel on two different axes. You can't even remotely imagine what the world looks like to a chameleon. Is there a picture of the world? And the answer is, there is no picture of the world. I remember a famous scientist, I think it was Sir James Jeans, who said there are no colors in the real world, there are no scents, nothing of the sort. The real world does not have colors, tastes, smells, fragrances. And now I'm paraphrasing, so you can check out the quote on your own, but nothing that we call experience is explainable. If the world is made of electrons and protons, which are human names given to modes of knowing and experience, and they have no color, they have no shape, they have no taste, they have no texture, they have no smell, then why is the world that I experience all of that? Why is the world that I'm experiencing currently full of taste? It's pretty messy, gooey, sticky, chaotic, orderly, full of richness of experience and color and shades and forms and tones and music and sound and thunder and whispering sounds and rustling of leaves and fragrances of flowers and the flights of birds and my own body and rainbows and stars and galaxies. Where is that happening? Where is that experience happening? What is that experience? First of all, if you examine that experience, you'll see that as experiences can be broken down into raw fundamentals of experience. The experience is a mode of sensing. What's a mode of sensing? It's consciousness sensing itself as that particular mode. A mode of sensing that gets sophisticated as sensation and sense perceptions, which are other modes of sensing or experience: sound, touch, sight, taste, smell. And then there are feelings associated with that. And there are interpretations of all these experiences that we call thought. In other words, modifications of consciousness experiencing itself as that which we call mind, body, universe. That much is clear, and I think that much is enough to give us the idea that the universe we experience, the body we experience, the trees we experience are all human constructs around modes of knowing and experience in human consciousness. What we experience is the human universe. What we experience is what we call the human body and animal bodies, but animal bodies are also constructs for modes of experience in human consciousness. Are those sentient beings by themselves? It looks like they are. as biological organisms, they have sentience, but what is it, or what is it that knows and has the idea that there is something called sentience? I know there's biological sentience, which you can disrupt with anesthesia, with a knock on the head, with a drug, with ayahuasca, with alcohol. There are modes of experience that will alter other modes of experience. And biological sentience can be altered. But who or what is it that knows of the construct that we call sentience? What is it that wants to know what is sentience? What is it that wants to know the basis of sentience, which is feeling and experience? The more we look at this, the more we can't get away from the idea that consciousness or awareness has to be the ontological primitive, the first cause, after which all the other causes can be easily explained through linear thinking. As Heisenberg said, later causes can be explained by earlier causes, but the first cause cannot be explained because it is probably without cause, acausal. And if it is without cause, then it cannot be in space or time, because cause-effect relationships only exist in space-time, are understood through experiences in space-time. And even our constructs, by the way, cannot conceive of a consciousness outside of space-time, because our imagination is based on experiences in space-time. Okay, so now let's go back to very important questions that science is attempting to ask. What created the Big Bang? Okay, if the Big Bang was the cause of the universe we are in, what created it? And the real answer is, never mind all the theories you hear, the real answer is we cannot know. We can construct mathematical models to say that it was a quantum fluctuation out of many that created the universe that we are in, which is fine-tuned for life and mind, a universe which has certain mathematical constants that make life possible, a universe that resulted in mind and life, and our own consciousness that wants to know. We can create that theoretical construct, and we can say that one out of infinite quantum fluctuations occurring in a quantum vacuum, or in Hilbert space, a mathematically defined construct which houses the wave function, created the Big Bang. But it's untestable. According to the current methodologies of science, it's untestable. Why is it untestable? Because of another concept, another construct called the Planck Epoch. What's the Planck Epoch? It's 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds after the supposed Big Bang. We cannot know what existed then, because there is no space-time, there is no matter, there is no energy, there is no such thing that we can call a particle. So the Planck Epoch is not subject to empirical inquiry. What created the Big Bang? Many theories, mathematical theories, multiverse, chaotic inflation, eternal inflation. You want to look them up, look them up. They are all mathematical theories that cannot be looked at through the scientific method. How did life first come about? If by life we mean awareness of life, because we cannot define life unless there is awareness of life, we cannot even have the construct, then you have to come to the conclusion that we cannot say that life as consciousness, a field of infinite possibilities, a superposition of infinite possibilities, existed all along, because possibilities cannot exist in space or time. So, how did humans evolve into where we are? Current concepts state that this is the result of biological evolution, and the best explanation is the origin of species as described by Darwin. Random mutations means variations of genes that naturally selected themselves out through being dominant. So the more mutations accidental in a particular direction, the more the natural selection favored those mutations. In other words, evolution is not purpose-driven, and it is a purely mechanical process. Okay, but random mutations could also be easily called unpredictable mutations, which means they appear random because we cannot predict them, and they ultimately end up building what we call species, and through natural selection leading to the origin of different species. A purely mechanical explanation by looking at the fossil record and ignoring the gaps in the fossil record anyway, which there are several. As you know that around the time of Darwin, there was also someone called Lamarck who suggested that evolution was teleological, that there was an endpoint to evolution, or at least a future determining the present. So a giraffe has a long tree, a giraffe has a long neck because it wants to reach up to that tree to survive. So it was driven by the need of survival, and there was always an end goal. Therefore, there was a purpose, the teleological, which then invokes consciousness and evolution guided by consciousness, which is anathema to physicalists and materialists. So even though everyone accepts Darwinian evolution in its strict definition of random mutations and natural selections, now we have epigenetics, which tells us that experiences in consciousness, including mental experiences like fear and anxiety and stress and love, these mental experiences can cause epigenetic marks on DNA that then regulate or modify or monitor the activity of genes. So whether these are inheritable traits, there's some evidence that they are. So at this moment, our science is in a way in a mode of questioning its own constructs that we are tied to, including Darwinian evolution and everything that we call cosmology and the origins of the universe. And people argue about that. They say, well, we can see today the fossil record. We can look at the radiation from the cosmic Big Bang, and therefore we can actually tell ourselves, almost like an archaeologist does, that this happened before we came along, that the universe came along before humans came along. Whilst that is true, when we examine the universe of the past, or when we construct the universe of the past, we base it on our current concepts. So when we imagine dinosaurs in the past, we construct that picture in human consciousness based on the fossil record, which is an interpretation of experience in human consciousness at this moment. So even the past of the universe is a human construct, even the past. And if you look up John Wheeler and you look up his delayed choice experiments, you will come up with the idea of multiple histories of the past, of the universe. So I'll leave you today with two very famous quotes. One is from Heisenberg. Forgive me if they're not exactly accurate, but they represent the original quotes. So Werner Heisenberg, considered by many as one of the pioneers and the father of quantum physics or quantum mechanics, said, "What we observe is not nature herself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." Who is asking the question? What is asking the question? And nature reveals to us, not as she is, but exposed to the method of questioning. The other quote I would like to leave you with is a quote from John Wheeler, and again, forgive me for not maybe quoting exactly, but you'll get what John Wheeler was saying. He said, "Every particle, every force field, even the fabric of space-time itself, is an apparatus derived answer to modes of questioning, yes and no questions by the observer who's doing the experiment." So whether it's a force field or the fabric of space-by-time geometry, that's a construct derived from modes of questioning with sophisticated apparatuses that extend the range of human experiences and the inferences from those experiences. And finally, I'll also leave you something with what Einstein said, and I will again be paraphrasing. Imagine all the seashores of the world and all the beaches of the world and all the grains of sand in all the beaches of the world, and you have access to one grain of sand in one of those beaches. That's literally what we have. The human brain, according to modern explanations of biological evolution, an accidental occurrence in the scheme of things through random, unpredictable mutations and natural selections, has very limited capacities. It's dark, and in that darkness, there are no images, there are no sounds, there are no textures, there are no tastes or smells. It's full of electrochemistry, electrochemicals, human constructs. This little brain, human brain, 3 pounds in size, on a speck of dust in an infinite void, looking at specks of dust available to us that we call stardust, coalescing into that which we call galaxies and the universe, but now maybe part of many universes, maybe part of infinite universes. The planet itself, a speck of dust, a grain of sand, on the seashores of eternity, trying to figure out reality. Most scientists today don't care about philosophy. In fact, I've heard people like Richard Dawkins and Neil Tyson dismiss philosophy as irrelevant. But philosophy has two very important words: epistemology, which basically refers to how do we know what we know, and are there limits to human knowing because of the capacities of the human brain, enormous as they are. And the other word in philosophy is ontology. What is the essence of being? What is the essence of existence? What is the ontological primitive of the universe? What is it that makes everything? And I think both scientists and today philosophers agree whatever it is not material in the usual sense. It doesn't occupy space, it has no mass. The origins of the universe and of reality and of everything that we experience are in an immaterial, unmeasurable domain of possibilities or potentials. And in many wisdom traditions, that domain is called consciousness or awareness. Consciousness is the capacity for experience. Consciousness is what makes experience possible. Consciousness is the knowing element of experience. And to quote Rupert Spira, consciousness is that in which all experience occurs, all experience is known, and out of which all experience is made. In other words, there's only consciousness. In other words, there's only awareness modulating itself into infinite experiences of form and phenomena that result in almost infinite knowers, infinite modes of knowing, infinite objects known, all within itself. And in this domain, there is no inner, no outer. There is only being, and being is immaterial, non-conceptualizable, unimaginable, but it experiences itself as concepts, as perceptions, as imagination, as mathematical constructs, as perception, and all the constructs based on perceptions that we call mind, body, and universe. In the deeper reality, all of that is a human construct. Even the word human is a human construct. And so ultimate reality is ineffable, cannot be expressed in words, and science does a good attempt to explain reality through its own methodologies, theories, experiments, observations, without ever defining who or what the observer is, and why does that which knows a little bit, why does it want to know? To what purpose? Can science or the scientific method explain life? I don't believe so, because life is asking the question. Can it explain consciousness? I don't believe so, because consciousness is asking the question. Consciousness wants to know itself through one method, the scientific method. But ultimately, consciousness cannot be explained. It can only be grasped, if that, by dialing down all the excitations of consciousness, which we call thoughts, emotions, feelings, perceptions, knowing and experiencing, and then resting within itself. That's where meditation and self-inquiry and vipassana and awareness come into play as clues to the source of all experience, source of thought, which is also the source of perception, feeling, all experience, and the constructs around those experiences. I hope this is helpful. Thank you very much.